So the Prime Minister this week announced that anti-Muslim hate crimes are to be recorded as a separate category for the very first time by police in Wales and England. The move brings Islamophobia in line with anti-Semitic attacks targeting Jews, which have been recorded separately for some time. But what is life like for Muslims in Wales on a daily basis? A meeting will be held in Cardiff next month asking people if they face barriers in getting on in life in Wales. The Commission on Islam, Participation and Public Life aims to encourage British Muslims to take on greater roles within our communities in Wales. Our reporter Jason Phelps has been to a new mosque in Carmarthen run by the West Wales Islamic Cultural Association, and he spoke to its General Secretary, Dr. Mohammad.
How do you feel as a member of society here in Carmarthen? Do you feel that you're part of that society?
Oh yes, definitely. We've been living in this area for a number of years now, and we've got fantastic links with the local community here. We've got links with the police. We've got links with the council. Our chairperson is part of the he's a council member himself. We've got good links with the parish church and so on. We very much feel part of this society here in this place. We've embraced the culture really in lots of ways really, and we feel as much part of Carmarthen as any other person would feel from this area.
Here in West Wales, do you feel any stigmas or any barriers, not only as Muslims but for other faiths as well?
I don't think so. This is a fantastic place to live in. I've been living here for 4.5, 5 years. I have never experienced any stigma or any barriers. People have accepted us really well. I feel very much part of the society. I can speak for other people who come to this mosque, and they also feel the same way. We have never experienced any discrimination or anything. No.
So no problems there then. Jason Phelps talking to Dr. Mohammad, General Secretary of the West Wales Islamic Cultural Association. Let's now talk to Professor Sophie Gilliat-Ray, who's the Director of the Islam UK Centre, also a Professor of Religious Studies at Cardiff University, and has been appointed to this commission. Sophie, hello, good morning to you.
Good morning.
Very nice to see you. Are you surprised by that very positive picture that was just painted there from Dr. Mohammad in Carmarthen?
Well, I think in places like Carmarthen, perhaps where relationships are a little bit stronger and perhaps people know each other a little bit better, I'm not entirely surprised. I think relationship building is absolutely key to improving understanding between Muslims and non-Muslims. And perhaps in larger cities like Cardiff, it's perhaps easier maybe for people not to get to know each other quite so well. I think we need to distinguish between relationship building at the kind of civic and leadership level and then what's happening on the ground. And I think at a sort of at the level of leadership, I think the relationships are strong. We only need to look at the example of the Muslim Council of Wales and its very strong connections with the church in Wales, with the Welsh Assembly government and so on. But I think at a street level it can be rather different, and I think that there can be some fear on either side, which I think that the Commission wants to investigate.
The texts are already coming in from the listeners. This is Tony in Cardiff who says, "Morning, Jason. Muslims will not integrate in this country because we do not know who they are. How can I say good morning to someone wearing a veil, for example? How do I know if you're my neighbour or not?" What do you say to Tony?
Yes. Well, I think there are lots of opportunities for relationship building and improving understanding. So, for example, there are a number of mosques in Cardiff that hold open days, and they actively welcome people to come in from all walks of life to find out what goes on in a mosque, meet and talk to some Muslims, receive fantastic warm hospitality. So, for example, Darul Isra on Wyvern Road regularly holds open days, and it's an opportunity for people to get to know a little bit more. From within Cardiff University, we ran Cardiff University's first MOOC, massive open online course about Muslims in Britain, and we had over 2 years we ran the programme, and over 11,000 people from all over the world, but predominantly in the UK, signed up because they wanted to know more. And I think that some of the people who took the course said, well, actually, I now feel more confident to ask questions of my Muslim neighbour or my colleague. I feel I have enough knowledge now about Islam that I'm not going to cause offence. And actually, I feel able to have that relationship and dialogue now, which is fantastic.
But the key question, Sophie, must surely be this. Whose responsibility is it? Is it our responsibility as Welsh communities, or does it fall upon the Muslim community to go out and actively engage in Welsh society?
I think it's a bit of both. We know that Muslims are very good at organising within their own infrastructure, so they've been active in developing schools, mosques, charities and so on. But Citizens UK established this commission because they noticed that there was less Muslim participation in civil society at a national level than other faith groups. And they feel that combating some of the problems facing the community, there needs to be equal access for all.
But they wouldn't have established
society.
this commission if there wasn't a problem. So in establishing the commission, there is obviously an inherent problem in Wales.
Well, they want to make the civil society more accessible to all, and they feel that there are some barriers to participation amongst Muslims in public life. And I think one of the really exciting things about this commission is that often Muslims are talked at, they're talked down to, they're talked across. And one of the things that I'm really excited about in the commission is that we are going to be talking with. So we're going to be going around the UK, coming to Cardiff next month in November. We're actually going to be listening to Muslim communities, to professional organisations and civil society bodies who work with Muslim communities to find out what the issues are. And it's this grassroots bottom-up perspective which really excites me, and I think Citizens UK as a community organising body is absolutely in line with the aims of the Islam UK Centre in having this grassroots bottom-up focus, and I think listening is a really important dimension of what the Commission will be doing.
Given that you're the director of the Islam UK Centre, just park that to one side for just one moment. Professor Sophie Gilliat-Ray, what does Professor Gilliat-Ray think? What are the barriers that British Muslims face? Your own personal view.
I think Islamophobia is a problem. I think there is a fear on the part of some Muslims in Britain that their identity is not recognised, valued and affirmed in public life.
That's within the Muslim community?
Indeed. And I mean, I think recently figures showed that there'd been a 70% increase in reporting of Islamophobic hate crime. These were figures from the Metropolitan Police. Yes. And so there's been a big rise in reporting, and 60% of that rise was attributed to women who felt fearful of how they dressed, how they looked and so on. And I would imagine that actually that's an underreporting of the true picture. So if you feel that your identity is not valued in public life, that is going to have a detrimental effect on your sense of belonging and inclusion. But
what's happening out there? Because, Sophie, I mentioned this last week, and I vowed before coming on air today that I wouldn't bring myself into this, but I do feel as if it's newsworthy and it demands me saying this. So the Prime Minister has announced this week that anti-Muslim hate crimes are to be recorded. And, I'm thinking, what is a hate crime? So you're talking about women who are reporting abuse?
Yeah, 60%.
What sort of abuse? Verbal abuse?
Spitting, name-calling, having the headscarf pulled off.
So here's the thing. Imagine growing up as a kid in Cardiff in the 80s with a surname like mine.
Right.
I was verbally abused. And I said this in a separate news item that we covered a couple of weeks ago. You just got on with it.
Yes.
It was part of everyday life. You just get on with it.
But is that right?
Well, it didn't do me any harm.
Well, I think
grew up very quickly.
Yeah, well, I think there are other issues that are challenging Muslim communities. So there are issues about religious leadership, finding role models for them to follow. Do you want other Muslims growing up in Cardiff to have the same experiences?
No, I don't.
No,
I don't.
So I think the work of the Commission is quite important in actually creating a more level playing field.
But you can see we've got this problem. We've got this perpetual issue of Islamophobia, in inverted commas. When I was growing up in the 80s being verbally abused, was that Islamophobia or was it just a mild dose of teenage bullying?
I think
I'm not suggesting whether this was right or wrong, and goodness me, God knows it hurt at the time.
Yes.
But my point is, you got on with life.
Sure.
And if you are going to count the figures of Islamophobia on name calling, then goodness me, you're going to be looking at 80%, 90% rises year on year.
Yes.
It's obviously getting worse.
I think we have to set this in context, though. You know, back in the 1980s, we hadn't had the Rushdie affair. That came right at the end of the 1980s. We hadn't had 9/11. We hadn't had 7/7. We hadn't had Charlie Hebdo. So all these things have amplified religious identity in the public sphere.
Absolutely.
So we're talking about a different time now.
What about young people? Don't you feel as if in order to understand the barriers that are possibly facing them succeeding in public life, for example, in Wales, don't you think that you need to talk to the local state schools, the comprehensives, where there is a huge population of Muslims, and asking them whether they feel as if they can achieve in public life in Wales, in politics, in media, in sport, in government, whatever?
Yes. Well, I mean, we've done research within the Islam UK Centre about young Muslims growing up in Cardiff. So we did a big study a few years ago looking at the religious identity of children of primary school age. Very little research has been done about them. And actually we found that they had a strong sense of pride in being Welsh and being born in Cardiff. They were very positive about it. But I still think there are barriers sometimes, that they're sometimes lacking role models for a more active participation. I think a little bit depends on perhaps which school you go to, which family you belong to, what kind of social capital you have within your community. And I think we want to see how the Commission can make that distribution of social capital more evenly spread.
Why do you think young men from homes less than 3 miles from where we're sitting broadcasting this radio show right now in Cardiff are turning to Islamic State, turning to terrorism, to do harm on this country? I
think it's a confluence of both kind of individual factors and wider socio-economic factors. I don't think it's can be attributed to one thing in particular, and I think it's enormously complicated. I think the danger is that we tend to focus too much on the extreme minority, and we forget about the kind of normative majority. We tend to hear about the extreme, the bad news stories. So let's hear more positive, good news stories. I mean, you yourself are a fantastic role model for Muslims who might want to go into the media. And within our own research in the Islam UK Centre in Cardiff, we found some fantastically positive role models, but their story isn't always told in the media.
That's very kind of you. Thank you for saying that. You did say in an interview recently that poverty, lack of aspiration and Islamophobia are partly to blame for radicalisation. Those young men from Cardiff, Sophie, Nasser Matana, 20 years old, former medical student. His brother Asil, what was he, 17? Rayad Khan, 21, who was killed by a drone strike. They came from supportive families. They had a good Welsh education, good friends, good life. They weren't poor. They weren't isolated. What turned them to IS?
Well, some of the research shows that some of the triggers for people joining these groups is maybe there's some kind of identity crisis, maybe something happens in their personal life. They start to question their own sense of identity and belonging. And if that happens to coincide with a personal crisis or something that's happened to somebody they know, they start to ask some big questions. And if they feel perhaps disconnected from wider society, then, you know, some of the messages of these radical preachers sometimes are very attractive, and they are dealing with these big issues, and they get drawn towards them. I think it's very important to point out that people who are drawn into these groups are often not terribly literate in their own faith. Their own understanding of Islam is often distorted, so they're not as well educated in their faith as we would like.
You said radical preachers. Are you suggesting there are radical preachers in Wales that we don't know about?
Quite possibly. Our research in Cardiff is very much focused on this normative majority, finding out what is happening at a grassroots level. There are plenty of academic centres and specialists who focus particularly on radicalisation, extremism, counter-terrorism. These have become specialist areas of research in their own right. It's something we don't focus on particularly, but we are interested on the effects that these kinds of discourses in public life can have on ordinary British Muslims, which is why the Commission's work in terms of listening is going to be really important.
Lots of texts and emails and tweets coming in. This one to end on, Sophie.
Yeah.
It's from Robert in the Rhondda, who says, The veil isn't compulsory in Islam, nothing to do with religion. The dads' brothers want these women to wear it. The veil doesn't stop integration. Many clerics say it's not part of the faith. Is it the defiance of the West? Wearing the modest clothes is fine, but can you please ask Sophie why these women insist on it? It makes integration very difficult, shows a lack of respect for the country we live in.
Well, I think we have a tradition in this country of allowing people to wear what they like and dress in their own cultural dress. And I think it would be a misunderstanding if people felt that women were being forced to dress, to wear a veil or a niqab. It's very often their own choice, and it's an expression of their own personal religious identity. And I think it's something that we should value and respect.
I wish you the very best. Thank you very much indeed.
Thank you very much.
Very good to talk to you. Thank you. That's Professor Sophie Gilliat-Ray, Director of the Islam UK Centre. Stacks of text coming in. Thank you all very much indeed. We'll just end for now on this one. Rachel on the text says, morning Jason, Nadia of the Great British Bake Off on BBC One has helped show there is a human face behind the veil. It has changed my perspective as the media has almost frightened Great British society. Thank you, Rach.